Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The scent of pine and cinnamon should have been comforting, but instead, it turned my stomach into knots. I pressed my forehead against the frosted window of the train, watching the landscape transform from rolling farmlands into dense, dark forests that seemed to swallow the winter light whole. My reflection stared back at me, pale blonde hair pulled into a braid that had come loose somewhere between Kansas and wherever I was now. Blue eyes rimmed with shadows from 3 sleepless nights, and a face that looked younger than my 24 years. I looked like what I was, a woman running toward an unknown future because the past had burned every bridge behind her. The letter crinkled in my coat pocket. I didn't need to read it again. I'd memorized every word during those endless miles of track, seeking a bride for the winter season. Must be adaptable, resilient, and unafraid of isolation. Previous matrimonial disappointments will not be held against applicants. The formal language had almost made me laugh when I first saw the advertisement in the back of that women's magazine at the general store. Almost. But desperation has a way of making even the absurd seem reasonable. I was one of 37 women on this train, all of us answering the same strange call, all of us carrying our own reasons wrapped tight around our hearts like winter scarves. The woman across from me, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, had been clutching a rosary since we crossed into Montana, 2 seats ahead. A redhead with freckles scattered across her nose hummed nervous songs under her breath. We were a collection of the unwanted, the desperate, the hopeful. Women who had looked at that cryptic advertisement and seen not warning signs but possibilities. The train's whistle screamed, and we began to slow. "Pine Haven Station," the conductor called, his voice careful and neutral in a way that made my spine straighten. Final stop. All passengers disembarking. Through the window, I could see the town, if you could call it that. A handful of buildings clustered around the platform, like frightened children gathering near a fire. Beyond them, the forest pressed in from all sides, ancient pines that looked like they'd been standing since before memory began. The December sky hung low and gray, pregnant with snow that hadn't yet decided to fall. We shuffled off the train in an awkward line, our breath forming clouds in the sharp air. The cold bit through my wool coat immediately, a wet kind of cold that promised to seep into bones and stay there. I'd grown up in Missouri, thought I knew winter. But this was different. This cold felt alive, watchful. A man waited on the platform, tall, weathered, with a beard more gray than brown, and eyes that catalogued each of us with the efficiency of someone assessing livestock. He wore a heavy fur-lined coat that looked hand-sewn, and when he spoke, his voice carried easily across the platform. "Welcome to Pine Haven," he said, and there was something in his tone that made the word sound less like a greeting and more like a warning. "I'm Clayton, head of the town council. You've all come a long way, and I'll be direct with you. What happens next will seem unusual, but I ask that you trust the process." The redhead beside me shifted nervously. "Where's the gentleman who placed the advertisement?" Clayton's expression flickered with something I couldn't quite read. "He'll present himself in due time. First, we have preparations to make. Tonight is the winter gathering, our most important celebration of the season. Each of you will be given lodging, time to refresh yourselves, and appropriate attire. The selection will take place at moonrise." Selection. The word hung in the frozen air like a verdict. We were ushered into a large wooden building that smelled of cedar and wood smoke. Inside, more women waited. Local women, I assumed, with their practical dresses and knowing eyes. They moved among us with quiet efficiency, separating us into small groups. I found myself led up a narrow staircase by a woman who couldn't have been more than 18, her blonde hair, nearly as light as mine, pulled back in a simple knot. "I'm Sarah," she said softly, as she opened a door to a small but clean room. A dress lay across the bed, deep forest green velvet with long sleeves and a neckline that would show my collarbones. "You'll want to bathe and rest. The gathering begins at 7. "Can I ask you something?" I said before she could leave. She paused, her hand on the doorframe, and I saw wariness flash across her young face. "What exactly are we being selected for?" Sarah's lips pressed together, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said very quietly, "Not what? Who?" She glanced down the hallway as if checking for listeners. "There are protocols here. Ancient ones. The king needs a mate, and the pack needs stability. That's all I can tell you. But I will say this. Be yourself tonight. Pretending to be something you're not won't serve you here. We can smell deception." She left before I could ask what she meant by that last part, though something in my chest had gone cold at her choice of words. Smell deception, not detect or sense. Smell. I drew a bath in the small adjoining room, sinking into water that had been scented with something herbal. Sage, maybe, or rosemary. As the heat soaked into my travel-weary muscles, I let my mind drift to the circumstances that had brought me here. The schoolhouse fire that had taken my position and my reputation when the town decided to blame the new teacher rather than their own negligence. The landlady who'd given me 3 days to vacate. The letter from my sister telling me not to come home, that her husband wouldn't allow it, that my situation would reflect poorly on their family. I had been erased from my own life so thoroughly that when I saw that advertisement, it felt less like risk and more like inevitability. The dress fit perfectly, which should have been my first real clue that something here was deeply, fundamentally different from the world I'd left behind. I had never given my measurements, never corresponded beyond a single letter confirming my acceptance of the position. Yet the green velvet hugged my waist and hips as if it had been sewn for my body specifically, the hem falling to exactly the right length above my borrowed boots. I plaited my blonde hair simply, letting a few loose strands frame my face, and studied my reflection in the small mirror. I looked like someone playing dress-up, a girl pretending to be a woman worthy of attention, but then I thought of Sarah's words, "Be yourself," and forced my shoulders back. If I was going to face whatever strange ritual awaited, I would do it with my spine straight and my chin up, even if my heart hammered like a frightened bird. The sun had set while I prepared. Through my window, I could see torches being lit throughout the town, their flames dancing against the darkness. The forest beyond seemed to have crept closer, or perhaps that was just the way shadows worked in this strange place. A knock at my door. Sarah stood there, now wearing a dress of deep burgundy, her expression carefully neutral. "It's time." I followed her down the stairs and out into the night. The cold shocked my lungs, sharper now than it had been that afternoon. Other women emerged from surrounding buildings, all of us converging on a large clearing at the edge of town where an enormous bonfire blazed, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-scattered sky. The local townspeople formed a wide circle around the fire, men, women, children, all of them watching us with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Their eyes caught the firelight strangely, reflecting it back in shades of amber and gold. I counted perhaps 70 people, maybe more, all dressed in similar earth tones and furs, all perfectly still and silent. We were arranged in a line facing the fire, all 37 of us who had answered that cryptic advertisement. I stood between the dark-haired woman with the rosary and a tall brunette, who kept her gaze locked on the flames as if afraid to look anywhere else. Clayton stepped forward, his voice carrying across the clearing. "We gather on this longest night to honor old ways and welcome new bonds. Our king seeks a mate, not for politics or convenience, but for survival, for transformation, for the continuation of everything we are." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd, and I felt, rather than heard, a change in the air, as if the forest itself had taken a breath and held it. "He comes," someone whispered, and the words rippled through the townspeople like wind through grass. From the tree line, a figure emerged. He was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to block out the stars behind him. He wore black, simple and unadorned, but he moved with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. As he came closer to the firelight, I could make out more details: dark hair that fell just past his collar, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes that were... My breath caught. His eyes were silver, not gray, not pale blue, but true metallic silver, luminous in the firelight, and when his gaze swept across our line of would-be brides, I felt the weight of it like a physical touch. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful: winter storms, cliff edges, the moment before lightning strikes. The Alpha King had arrived, and nothing in that advertisement had prepared me for this. He moved down our line slowly, studying each woman with an attention that made several of them drop their gazes. The dark-haired woman beside me began praying under her breath. The redhead who'd been humming on the train had gone completely pale. When he reached me, he stopped. Those silver eyes met mine, and I felt something inside my chest shift, like tectonic plates adjusting to a new configuration. His nostrils flared slightly, and his head tilted just a fraction, a movement so subtle I might have imagined it. "Your name," he said, and his voice was rough velvet, a sound that seemed to resonate in my bones. "Elena," I managed, surprised my voice didn't shake. "Elena Morrison." He studied me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in those impossible eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Though we had never met. Could never have met. Then he moved on, continuing down the line, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. The selection process was brief and brutal in its efficiency. The king, I still didn't know his name, touched the shoulder of 5 women, including Sarah, who I now understood was not just a local girl, but part of whatever test this was. Each woman he touched joined him near the fire, forming a smaller circle within the larger gathering. I was not among them. Relief and disappointment warred in my chest as Clayton began speaking again, explaining that the chosen women would spend the next 3 days in close observation with the pack, while the rest of us would be given work in the town until— Wait. The king's voice cut through Clayton's explanation like a blade through silk. Every person in the clearing went absolutely still. He was looking at me. "The blonde," he said, still not moving, still focused on me with that unnerving intensity. "Elena Morrison, she stays." Word count. 2,089 words. I need to add more content to reach the required 2,250, 2,300 words. Let me continue. Clayton's eyebrows rose fractionally, the first real emotion I'd seen cross his weathered face. "Your Majesty, the initial selection has been made according to protocol. Then consider this an amendment to protocol." The king's tone left no room for argument. He gestured toward the group of chosen women. "She joins them." Murmurs rippled through the crowd now, low and urgent. I caught fragments of words, unusual, never before, against tradition, but they died away when the king's silver gaze swept across the assembled townspeople. I moved forward on trembling legs, acutely aware of every eye tracking my progress toward the fire. The 5 other women shifted to make room for me in their circle, and I found myself standing directly across from the king, the bonfire blazing between us. The heat from the flames should have been uncomfortable, but instead it felt necessary, a barrier and a bridge all at once. Sarah stood to my left, her young face carefully composed. But when she caught my eye, I saw something there. Sympathy, maybe, or warning. The other women ranged in age from early 20s to perhaps 40, each beautiful in her own way, each carrying herself with a confidence that made my borrowed poise feel paper thin. "The trial period begins now," Clayton announced, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "These 6 women will live among us, participate in our daily lives, and demonstrate their capacity to adapt to our ways. At the end of 3 days, the king will make his final choice." The crowd began to disperse, families and individuals drifting back toward the town in small groups. But several people lingered, younger men mostly, ranging from their late teens to early 30s, all watching our small circle with varying degrees of interest and wariness. They stood together in a loose formation, and something about the way they positioned themselves around the king made me think of soldiers flanking a general, or a pack surrounding their alpha. The thought materialized fully formed in my mind, and with it came a cascade of small observations clicking into place like puzzle pieces. The way everyone moved in subtle deference to the king's position, the strange reflective quality of their eyes in the firelight, Sarah's comment about smelling deception, the impossible fit of the dress, the letter's emphasis on adaptability and fearlessness of isolation. You're thinking very loudly, Elena Morrison. I jerked my attention back to find the king watching me, a slight curve to his lips that might have been amusement. He'd moved while I was lost in thought, closing the distance between us until only the fire's width separated us. I apologize, I said carefully. I'm trying to understand where exactly I've arrived. That's wiser than pretending to understand what you clearly don't. He tilted his head, studying me with that same unsettling intensity. Most of the others are performing comprehension. You're actually seeking it. Why? The question felt like a test, though I couldn't imagine what answer he was looking for. So I gave him the truth, because I've learned that pretending to know things is how you make fatal mistakes, and something tells me mistakes here might actually be fatal. Several of the young men behind him exchanged glances. One of them, sandy-haired with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, let out a low whistle that sounded almost approving. The king's smile widened fractionally. What's your hidden talent, Elena Morrison? The question caught me off guard. I'm sorry? The advertisement specified that adaptability and resilience were required, but everyone has something they're good at, something that defines them beyond mere survival. What's yours? I thought of the schoolhouse, of the children who'd actually learned under my teaching despite their parents' eventual betrayal. I thought of the gifts I'd discovered in myself during desperate times. The ability to read a room, to sense tensions before they erupted, to find patterns in chaos. But something made me hesitate, made me hold back the full truth. Instead, I said, I'm good at listening, at seeing what people need even when they can't articulate it themselves. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. And from the way those silver eyes narrowed slightly, I suspected he knew it. We'll see, he said softly. Then, louder, addressing all 6 of us. Tomorrow, you'll be integrated into pack life. You'll work, eat, and live as we do. Some of you will thrive, some of you won't. The choice you make in the next 3 days will determine not just your future, but ours as well. Don't take that responsibility lightly. He turned and walked back toward the forest, the young men falling into step around him like planets orbiting a sun. Within moments, they'd been swallowed by the darkness between the trees, leaving only the dying bonfire and 6 bewildered women standing in a circle of trampled snow. Well, said one of the other women, a striking brunette with sharp cheekbones and calculating eyes. This is either the most interesting decision I've ever made or the stupidest. I haven't decided which yet. Both, Sarah said quietly, staring at the spot where the king had disappeared. Definitely both. As we were led back to our lodgings, all of us now housed in the same large building, 3 rooms with 2 women each, I couldn't shake the feeling of those silver eyes on my skin. Couldn't forget the way the air had felt different when he'd stood close. I was sharing a room with Sarah, and as we changed out of our formal dresses in the lamplight, I finally asked the question that had been building all evening. What is he? Sarah paused in the act of hanging her burgundy dress, her back to me. When she turned, her expression was grave. He's exactly what you're beginning to suspect, she said softly. And tomorrow, you'll see why that matters more than you can possibly imagine. She climbed into bed without another word, leaving me to stand at the window, staring out at the dark forest, and wondering what dawn would bring. The last thing I saw before I finally slept was a pair of silver eyes watching from the tree line, catching the lamplight from my window like a predator's gaze reflecting in the dark. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt something else entirely, a pull, a recognition, a sense that my entire life had been a path leading to this strange town, this impossible king, and whatever truth waited in those ancient woods. The trial had begun. Dawn came gray and reluctant, seeping through the frost-covered window like watercolor bleeding across paper. I woke to find Sarah's bed already empty, the quilts folded with military precision. My body ached from the unfamiliar mattress and the tension I'd carried even in sleep. Dreams fragmented with silver eyes and dark forests that whispered secrets I couldn't quite hear. I dressed quickly in the simple clothes that had been left on a chair, sturdy wool trousers, a thick cream-colored sweater, and boots that actually fit. Again, that impossible accuracy of size. I was beginning to understand that nothing in Pinehaven happened by accident. Downstairs, the other women were already gathered around a long wooden table, eating breakfast in varying states of wakefulness. The sharp-cheeked brunette from last night, who introduced herself as Victoria, sat with perfect posture despite the early hour, her dark hair already arranged in an elegant twist. Across from her, a woman named Beth with kind eyes and nervous hands picked at her food without eating. Sarah moved between the kitchen and table with easy familiarity, bringing fresh bread and coffee that smelled like heaven. "You're the last one up," Victoria observed, her tone making it sound like a character assessment rather than a simple statement. "Interesting. I prefer to think of it as efficient time management," I replied, sliding into an empty chair. "Why wake early if there's no immediate crisis?" The faintest smile touched Victoria's lips. "I suspect we'll discover whether that's wisdom or foolishness soon enough." Before I could respond, the door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and 3 men. I recognized one immediately, the sandy-haired man with the scarred eyebrow who'd been part of the King's group last night. The other 2 were younger, both dark-haired, one tall and lean, the other broader with a face that looked made for smiling. "Morning, ladies," the scarred one said, his accent carrying traces of somewhere further north. "I'm Garrett. These 2 troublemakers are Owen," he indicated the tall one, "and Finn." The broader man gave us a cheerful wave. "We're your guides for the day. Hope you all slept well, because you're about to get a crash course in pack life." "Pack," Beth repeated softly, her nervous hand stilling on her coffee cup. "So it's true. You're actually werewolves?" Finn finished with a grin that showed very white teeth. "Yeah, surprise. Though if you hadn't figured that out by now, this is going to be a rough 3 days for you." I watched the other women's reactions carefully. Victoria's expression barely changed, confirming my suspicion that she was the type who prided herself on never being surprised. Beth looked like she might be sick. The other 2 women, Claire and Rosemarie, exchanged glances that suggested they'd already discussed this possibility in their shared room. Sarah simply poured more coffee, completely unsurprised, and I realized she must have grown up knowing she was part of this world in ways we outsiders couldn't yet grasp. "Questions?" Garrett asked, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "Better to get them out now." "How many of you are there?" I heard myself ask. "In Pine Haven?" "About 80. In the broader territory? Maybe 300 scattered across Montana and into Canada." Owen's voice was quieter than his companions, more measured. "We're one of the larger packs in North America, which is both a strength and a complication." "And the king?" Victoria asked, her tone carefully neutral. "What's his name? We can't keep calling him the king if we're supposed to be candidates for his mate." The 3 men exchanged a look that carried weight. Finally, Garrett said, "His name is Nathaniel Ashwood. He's been king for 6 years since his father's passing. He's 32, unmatched, and under increasing pressure from the Pack Council to choose someone before the winter solstice." "Which is in 3 days," Sarah added quietly from the kitchen. The timeline clicked into place. This wasn't just a trial period, it was a deadline. The winter gathering, the rushed selection, the strange urgency underlying everything. Nathaniel Ashwood needed to choose a mate before the solstice, and we were his last-ditch options. "Why mail-order brides?" I asked, the question escaping before I could consider whether it was wise. "Surely there are women in the pack who would—" "There are," Owen interrupted, and something in his tone made me stop. "But there are complications, political ones. Choosing someone from within the pack means elevating one family over others, creating resentment and instability. An outsider is neutral ground, and a human." He trailed off, seeming to search for words. "A human is weak," Victoria finished bluntly. "No offense intended, but that's the thinking, isn't it? A human mate can't challenge his authority, can't threaten his position, and brings no family alliances that might complicate pack dynamics." Finn's cheerful expression dimmed. "That's not exactly... But it's not exactly wrong, either," Garrett said quietly. "Look, the politics here are complicated. What matters is that Nathaniel needs a mate who can handle what it means to be queen to a werewolf pack, someone adaptable, intelligent, and brave enough not to run screaming when things get dangerous." How dangerous are we talking? Beth whispered. None of the men answered immediately, which was answer enough. Come on, Garrett finally said, pushing off from the doorframe. Better to show you than explain. Dress warm. We're going into the forest. The woods in daylight were somehow more unsettling than they'd been at night. At least darkness offered the mercy of limited vision. Now I could see exactly how vast they were, how the pines stretched endlessly in every direction, their branches so dense overhead that the morning sun barely penetrated. Our breath formed clouds in the frigid air as we followed Garrett, Owen, and Finn along a narrow trail that wound deeper into the territory. This is the inner boundary, Garrett explained, gesturing to marks carved into certain trees, symbols that looked ancient and deliberately placed. Everything within these boundaries belongs to the Ashwood Pack. Everything outside is neutral territory, or belongs to other packs. And if someone crosses the boundary uninvited, Claire asked. She was mid-30s, practical looking, with auburn hair braided down her back. Depends on who they are and why they're here, Owen said. Other werewolves know better unless they're looking for trouble. Humans usually just get escorted out with a strong suggestion not to return. But there are other things in these woods, things that don't respect boundaries the way they should. Before I could ask what he meant, a howl echoed through the trees. Long, mournful, and far too close. Every woman in our group froze. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in my chest cavity like a second heartbeat. Relax, Finn said, though his easy smile had sharpened into something more alert. That's just the morning patrol checking in. You'll get used to it. Will we? Beth murmured, her face pale. We continued walking, and gradually I became aware of other presences in the forest. Shapes moving parallel to our path, keeping pace but staying hidden in the dense undergrowth. Once, I caught a glimpse of something large and dark between the trees. Too big to be a natural wolf, moving with an intelligence that made my pulse quicken. They're watching us, I said quietly. Garrett glanced back at me with something like approval. Good. You should always assume you're being watched here. The pack is protective of its territory and its king. They want to see how you handle yourselves in their space. We emerged into a clearing where several structures stood, not houses exactly, but large wooden buildings that looked designed for communal use. Smoke rose from chimneys, and I could hear voices, laughter, the sounds of normal life. But as we approached, that normalcy revealed its strangeness. Children played in the snow, their movements too quick, too graceful. Adults worked on various tasks, repairing structures, processing meat from a recent hunt, tending fires, but they all paused to watch us pass, their eyes tracking our movement with predatory focus. This is the pack center, Owen explained. Most families have homes in town or scattered through the territory, but we gather here for meals, meetings, and celebrations. It's the heart of our community. A woman approached us, older, perhaps 60, with gray-streaked blonde hair and eyes that held centuries of knowing despite her apparent age. She wore practical work clothes, but carried herself with an authority that made even Garrett straighten slightly. So these are the candidates, she said, her voice crisp with a faint European accent. I am Ingrid, the pack's healer and Nathaniel's advisor. I'll be evaluating your practical skills this morning. Evaluating, Victoria repeated. What exactly does that entail? Ingrid's smile was sharp. Whatever needs doing. We don't keep useless people here, regardless of who they might marry. If you can't contribute, you can't stay. It's that simple. She divided us into pairs, assigning each to a different task. I found myself partnered with Beth, sent to help prepare the midday meal in the large communal kitchen. The space was warm and chaotic, filled with women working with practiced efficiency. They barely acknowledged us beyond a few curt nods, too focused on their tasks to bother with curiosity. You, blonde one, a woman called to me. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair pulled back and arms strong from labor. Can you handle a knife? I thought of all the meals I'd prepared alone in my small apartment, all the times I'd made something from nothing. Yes. She tossed me a knife and pointed to a pile of root vegetables. Peel and dice. We need them uniform. I caught the knife easily and set to work. Beside me, Beth struggled with her own assigned task, kneading bread dough, her nervous energy making her clumsy. The pack women watched us with barely concealed judgment, clearly measuring our worth against some invisible standard. "You've done this before," the dark-haired woman observed after a few minutes, watching my hands move with practiced efficiency. "I lived alone for several years. You learn to cook or you starve. Good. We don't have time for precious girls who can't manage basic survival skills." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "I'm Brenna. I'll give you advice because Ingrid would want me to, even if I don't particularly care which of you survives this ridiculous trial." "That's comforting," I said dryly, and was surprised when Brenna's lips twitched with something like amusement. "Nathaniel is a good king, but he's been alone too long. It's made him careful to the point of paralysis. He needs someone who will push him, challenge him, not just follow orders." She paused, studying me. "You don't strike me as the obedient type, despite that soft face." "I'm not sure if that's a compliment or an insult." "Neither. Just an observation." Brenna handed me another pile of vegetables. "The pack is restless. We need stability, which means we need a queen. But more than that, we need someone who understands that being queen doesn't mean wearing pretty dresses and smiling at ceremonies. It means making impossible choices and living with the consequences." Before I could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, sudden movement, the sound of something crashing. The pack women moved as one toward the doors, their casual demeanor transforming into sharp alertness. I followed, Beth close behind me, and found chaos in the clearing. A group of men had formed a tight circle around something, or someone. As we pushed closer, I saw Nathaniel at the center, his shirt torn, blood marking his shoulder, but he was standing, very much alive, and very clearly furious. At his feet lay a massive wolf, unconscious or worse, its gray fur matted with darker stains. "What happened?" Ingrid demanded, pushing through the crowd with an authority that made even the largest men step aside. "Challenge," Garrett said grimly. He'd appeared from somewhere, along with Owen and Finn, all three positioning themselves between Nathaniel and the growing crowd. "Marcus decided today was the day to test the king's strength. Fool," Ingrid hissed. She knelt beside the fallen wolf, her hands already moving in examination. "He knew this wasn't the time. There's never a good time for treason," Nathaniel said, his voice cold and hard in a way I hadn't heard before. Those silver eyes swept across the assembled pack, and I saw several people flinch under that gaze. "Let this be clear. I don't care about posturing or politics. If you want my position, come take it, but understand that I won't show mercy to anyone who threatens pack stability, especially not now." His gaze found mine in the crowd, held for a fraction of a second, then moved on. But in that brief connection, I'd seen something that made my breath catch. Not anger, but exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of someone carrying too much weight for too long. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their tasks with nervous energy. Ingrid was calling for help to move the injured wolf, her voice sharp with commands. Nathaniel remained standing in the center of the clearing, alone, despite being surrounded by his pack, blood slowly staining his torn shirt. I made a decision without fully understanding why. I walked toward him. "Elena," Beth hissed behind me. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer because I wasn't entirely sure myself. I just knew that everyone else was giving him space, treating him like something untouchable. And something about that isolation made my chest ache. I stopped a few feet away. Up close, I could see that the injury on his shoulder was deeper than it had first appeared, still bleeding sluggishly, his silver eyes fixed on me with that same unsettling intensity. "You should be with the others," he said quietly. "Probably," I agreed, "but you're hurt, and everyone else is busy either moving the unconscious challenger or pretending they didn't just witness their king fight for his position. So I thought maybe you could use someone to point out that you're bleeding." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the faintest hint of amusement. "I'm aware. And yet you're standing here like a statue instead of getting that looked at." I paused, then added more softly. "Does it happen often? The challenges?" "More often lately." He glanced down at his shoulder as if only just noticing the injury. "The pack is unsettled. They need to know their king is strong enough to lead them through what's coming, and what's coming. Those silver eyes met mine again, and in them I saw something that made my skin prickle with warning. That, he said quietly, is what I'm trying to prevent you from having to find out. Before I could ask what he meant, Ingrid appeared at his elbow, her expression severe. Inside. Now, that wound needs cleaning before it gets infected. She glanced at me, and something calculating entered her gaze. You, blonde one, come with us. Her name is Elena, Nathaniel said, still looking at me. I know what her name is, Ingrid replied tartly. I also know she's the only one of your candidates brave enough or foolish enough to approach you while you're covered in blood. That's either a useful trait or a dangerous one. I haven't decided which yet. She turned and began walking toward one of the buildings. Come along, both of you. The morning meal can wait. I followed, acutely aware of Nathaniel walking beside me, his presence somehow both comforting and unsettling. Behind us, I could feel the pack watching, assessing, judging this small interaction and finding meaning in it that I couldn't yet understand. The trial was becoming more complicated by the hour, and I was beginning to suspect that surviving it would require more than just adaptability. It would require seeing truths that others missed, and having the courage to act on them even when every instinct screamed to stay invisible and safe. As Ingrid's door closed behind us, shutting out the cold and the watching eyes, I realized I'd just chosen visibility. Now I had to figure out if that choice would save me or destroy me. Ingrid's workspace smelled of herbs, and something sharper, antiseptic maybe, or the medicinal tinctures that lined the shelves in amber bottles. The room was warm, heated by a wood stove in the corner, and surprisingly organized despite the sheer quantity of supplies. Dried plants hung from the ceiling beams, their shadows dancing across walls covered in detailed anatomical drawings that showed both human and wolf forms. Sit, Ingrid commanded, pointing Nathaniel toward a sturdy chair near the examination table. To me, she said, there's a basin by the window. Fill it with water from the kettle, the hot one, not the cold, and bring the cloth from the cabinet beside it. I moved quickly, grateful for concrete tasks that gave my nervous hands something to do. As I prepared the supplies, I watched from the corner of my eye as Nathaniel shrugged carefully out of his ruined shirt, revealing a body that was all lean muscle and old scars. The fresh wound on his shoulder was a ragged tear, deep enough that I could see the edges pulling apart with each breath he took. It looks worse than it is, he said, catching my expression. It looks like you were mauled by something with very large teeth, I replied, bringing the basin over. Which I suppose is exactly what happened. Ingrid took the water from me with a grunt that might have been approval. Hold this, she said, handing me a clean cloth. When I tell you, press it against the wound. Firm pressure, don't be squeamish. She began cleaning the injury with efficient, practiced movements. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he made no sound. Didn't flinch even when Ingrid probed the deepest part of the tear. I found myself studying his face. The strong lines of it, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the silver eyes that seemed to see through walls and pretense alike. You're staring, he said quietly, not looking at me. You're interesting to look at, I replied honestly. Besides, it's either stare at you or stare at the wound, and one of those options makes me less likely to faint. Ingrid made a sound that might have been a laugh. At least this one has the sense to admit her limitations. The brunette, Victoria, spent 20 minutes this morning insisting she could handle anything, then nearly retched when Brenna brought out the morning hunt. Now, Ingrid said sharply, and I pressed the cloth against Nathaniel's shoulder as she'd instructed. I felt him tense under my hands, felt the heat of his skin and the way his muscles coiled with suppressed reaction. The blood soaked through the cloth quickly, hot and vivid against the white fabric. Harder, Ingrid commanded. He heals fast, but not instantaneously. We need to slow the bleeding before I can stitch it. I pressed harder, and Nathaniel's hand came up to cover mine, not pushing me away, but steadying my grip, adjusting the angle slightly. His palm was calloused and warm, and I tried not to think about how that simple touch sent electricity up my arm. Why did he challenge you? I asked, partly to distract myself and partly because I genuinely wanted to understand. Marcus, I mean. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, and I thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because he thinks I'm weak for seeking a human mate. Because he believes that 6 years without choosing someone from the pack is an insult to tradition. Because he's young and ambitious and sees an opportunity in the council's growing impatience." "Is he wrong?" I asked. "About the weakness, I mean." Those silver eyes fixed on me, and I saw something dangerous flicker in their depths. "What do you think?" I considered the question seriously, ignoring Ingrid's sharp glance. "I think," I said slowly, "that anyone who mistakes kindness for weakness or patience for indecision is going to find themselves surprised and probably bleeding. I think you're carrying something heavy that no one else can see, and that makes you careful rather than weak. And I think Marcus probably learned that lesson about 30 seconds into whatever fight happened out there." Silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the stove and the distant sounds of the pack center beyond the walls. Then Nathaniel did something unexpected. He smiled. It transformed his face completely, softening the harsh angles and making him look younger, more human. "Ingrid," he said, still looking at me, "I'm beginning to see why you told me to bring her in here." "I told you to bring her because I needed an extra pair of hands," Ingrid replied primly, but there was satisfaction in her tone. "The fact that she has a working brain is merely a bonus. Now move your hand. I need to stitch this before you heal around the torn edges." I stepped back as Ingrid worked, watching her needle move with practiced precision. Nathaniel sat perfectly still throughout the process, his breathing deep and controlled. I found myself counting his breaths, matching my own rhythm to his, and felt my earlier nervousness begin to settle into something calmer. "Tell me about your hidden talent," Nathaniel said suddenly, his voice cutting through my thoughts. I blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Last night I asked what you were good at. You said listening, seeing what people need. But there's more to it than that, isn't there?" His gaze was direct, searching. "I can smell when people lie, Elena." "You didn't lie exactly, but you didn't tell the complete truth either." My mouth went dry. I glanced at Ingrid, who was focused on her stitching, but clearly listening to every word. The truth sat on my tongue, heavy and complicated, and I had to decide in that moment how much to reveal. "I can sense things," I finally said. "Emotions, mostly. Not thoughts. Nothing that clear. But I can feel what people are feeling. Sometimes even when they're trying hard to hide it. It's like..." I struggled for the right words, like walking into a room and knowing immediately that two people just finished arguing, or that someone is afraid even though they're smiling. I pick up on patterns in behavior, predict how people will react. "A human empath," Ingrid murmured, tying off the last stitch. "Rare, but not unheard of. Though usually not this strong." "Is that why you became a teacher?" Nathaniel asked. "Because you could sense what your students needed?" "Partly." And the memory of the schoolhouse fire tightened my chest. It made me good at my job, too good maybe. People don't always like it when you can see through their performances. "No," Nathaniel agreed quietly. "They don't." He flexed his shoulder experimentally, testing Ingrid's work. "How does it work here? Among the pack?" I'd been wondering that myself since arriving. "Louder," I admitted, "more intense. Whatever you all are, it amplifies emotion somehow." Last night at the gathering, I could barely think through all the feelings pressing in from every direction. It was like standing in the middle of a thunderstorm made of other people's hearts. Ingrid and Nathaniel exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. Then Ingrid said, "That could be either very useful or very dangerous. Pack emotions run hot, territorial instincts, hierarchical tensions, the bond between packmates. If you're feeling all of that without any natural shields, it's manageable," I said quickly, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "I've learned to filter, to focus. It's just a matter of adjustment. Everything here is a matter of adjustment," Nathaniel said, standing. His shoulder was already looking better, the angry redness around the stitches fading to pink. "The question is whether you can adjust fast enough." Before I could ask what he meant, the door burst open and Finn stumbled in, his usual cheerful expression replaced by urgency. "Nathaniel, we have a problem. The Northern Boundary Patrol just reported movement. Multiple unknowns, coming from the Canadian territory." Nathaniel's entire demeanor shifted, the brief moment of openness slamming shut behind walls of authority and control. How many? At least 15. Maybe more. They're not trying to hide their approach. Finn's eyes flicked to me, then back to his king. They're flying colors. It's an official delegation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ingrid cursed in what sounded like German, already moving to put away her medical supplies with sharp, precise movements. "The Frost River Pack," Nathaniel said. And it wasn't a question. They heard about the trial. Looks that way. Finn shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "What do you want to do?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he thought through options I couldn't begin to guess at. "Finally," he said, "send word to gather the candidates. All 6 of them, in the main hall within the hour. If Frost River wants to see what we're doing, they can see it properly. And get me a clean shirt, preferably one without claw marks." Finn nodded and disappeared as quickly as he'd arrived. I stood frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. Delegation, official visit. The tension in both Ingrid's and Nathaniel's expressions suggested this was very bad news. "What does this mean?" I asked. Nathaniel pulled on the shirt Ingrid handed him, simple black cotton that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "It means," he said carefully, "that the timeline just got even tighter. The Frost River Pack is our nearest neighbor and our oldest rival. If they're sending a delegation during the trial period, it's because they want to assess our stability, or lack thereof." "And if they decide we're unstable?" I pressed. His silver eyes met mine, and I saw the weight of leadership in them, the burden of protecting an entire community. "Then we're looking at a challenge for territory. Possibly worse." The implications crashed over me like cold water. This wasn't just about Nathaniel choosing a mate anymore. This was about survival, about power dynamics I barely understood, about politics that stretched beyond human comprehension. "You need to understand something," Nathaniel said, stepping closer. If any of you stay, you're not just agreeing to marry a werewolf king. You're agreeing to stand at the center of conflicts that could turn dangerous very quickly. This isn't a fairy tale, Elena. This is real, and it's complicated, and people could get hurt." I thought about his words from earlier, about preventing us from having to find out what was coming. I thought about the challenge this morning, about the way the pack watched their king with a mixture of loyalty and assessment. I thought about the weight he carried alone. "And you've been carrying all of this by yourself," I said quietly. "For 6 years." Something in his expression cracked, just for a moment. Then it was gone, replaced by the controlled mask of leadership. "Come on," he said. "We need to prepare you and the others for what's about to happen. And Elena," he paused at the door, "thank you. For earlier. For approaching me when everyone else kept their distance." "You're welcome," I said, meaning it. As we walked back through the pack center toward the main hall, I could feel the change in atmosphere. Word of the approaching delegation had spread quickly, and people moved with purpose now, their earlier casual energy replaced by watchful readiness. Children were being ushered inside, adults checked weapons with practiced ease. The entire community was preparing for something. Garrett met us halfway, his scarred face grim. The others are already gathering. Victoria's asking a lot of questions. Beth looks like she might bolt, and Sarah's trying to keep everyone calm. "And the other 2? Nathaniel asked. Claire seems steady. Rosemary's quiet, but she's not panicking. Garrett glanced at me. "You good?" I realized he was asking if I could handle what was coming, whatever that was. I thought about running, about asking to be sent back to the train station, back to the normal world where the biggest danger was a disapproving landlady or a lost teaching position. But I also thought about Nathaniel's shoulder, about the exhaustion in his eyes, about the way an entire community depended on decisions he made alone. "I'm good," I said, and felt the truth of it settle into my bones. The main hall was exactly what it sounded like. A massive wooden structure with high ceilings supported by ancient beams, a stone fireplace large enough to roast an entire deer, and windows that looked out over the forest. The 6 of us candidates stood in an awkward cluster near the center while pack members filed in, taking positions along the walls with the organized precision of a military unit. Victoria caught my eye and mouthed, What's happening? I shook my head slightly. I had pieces of the puzzle, but not enough to see the full picture. Nathaniel stood at the front of the hall, flanked by Garrett, Owen, and Finn. Ingrid had positioned herself near the fireplace, her sharp eyes cataloging everyone and everything. The pack was perhaps 50 strong in this space. Not everyone, but enough to represent the community's strength. Listen carefully, Nathaniel said, his voice carrying easily across the hall. In approximately 30 minutes, we're going to have visitors from the Frost River Pack. This is both a diplomatic courtesy and a strategic assessment. They want to see how we're handling the succession question. Why do they care? Claire asked, her practical nature overriding any nervousness. Because a pack without a stable leadership structure is vulnerable, Owen answered. And vulnerable territory is territory that can be challenged and claimed. Beth made a small sound of distress. Victoria's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Rosemary remained perfectly still, taking everything in. Sarah, I noticed, had positioned herself slightly apart from us other candidates, her role somewhere between insider and outsider. What do you need from us? I found myself asking. Nathaniel's gaze fixed on me, and I felt that pull again, that strange recognition that made no logical sense. I need you to be exactly what you are. Don't perform. Don't pretend. They'll sense deception immediately, and it will make things worse. And what exactly are we? Victoria asked. In their eyes, I mean. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Finally, Garrett said, You're proof that our king is taking the succession seriously. You're evidence of stability and forward planning. And if any of you actually prove compatible... He trailed off, glancing at Nathaniel. Then you're the future, Nathaniel finished quietly, for better or worse. Outside, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps, many of them, moving in synchronized formation. The Frost River delegation had arrived. Nathaniel straightened, his entire bearing shifting into something that was pure authority, pure power. When he looked at us candidates one last time, his expression was unreadable. Whatever happens next, he said, remember that you chose to be here. That choice matters more than you might think. Then the doors opened, and everything changed. The Frost River delegation entered like winter itself had taken human form. Cold, beautiful, and inherently dangerous. There were 12 of them, moving in perfect synchronization, their footsteps echoing against the wooden floor, in a rhythm that felt deliberately intimidating. They wore uniforms of sorts, dark gray and white, practical, but clearly meant to convey unity and strength. Each one radiated the same predatory grace I'd seen in Nathaniel's pack, but there was something sharper about them, something that made my empathic senses recoil instinctively. At their head walked a woman who could only be their leader. She was tall, with silver blonde hair braided in an intricate crown around her head, and eyes the color of ice on a frozen lake. She might have been 40 or 400. It was impossible to tell. Beauty and menace existed in equal measure in her angular features, and when her gaze swept across the assembled hall, I felt several pack members tense. Nathaniel Ashwood, she said, her voice carrying an accent I couldn't quite place. Nordic, perhaps, or Russian. It's been too long since Frost River visited your territory, Katerina. Nathaniel's tone was perfectly cordial, perfectly neutral. Your visit is unexpected, though not unwelcome. To what do we owe this honor? Katerina's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Can neighbors not check on one another, especially during such significant times? Her gaze moved deliberately to where we 6 candidates stood clustered together. I heard rumors of a trial, a king seeking a mate through unconventional means. Naturally, I was curious. The air in the hall felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I could sense the tension radiating from Nathaniel's pack, protective instinct warring with diplomatic necessity. From Katerina's delegation, I felt something colder, calculation, assessment. And underneath it all, a current of something that tasted like ambition. The rumors are accurate, Nathaniel said calmly, though I'm surprised news traveled north so quickly. Information moves fast when it concerns territorial stability. Katerina moved deeper into the hall, her delegation spreading out behind her in a formation that was clearly meant to dominate the space. A king without a mate for 6 years raises questions about strength, about commitment, about the future of a pack that controls such valuable territory. There it was, the real reason for this visit laid bare. This wasn't diplomatic courtesy. This was a challenge wrapped in civilized language. "The Ashwood Pack's stability is not in question," Garrett said, his scarred face set in hard lines. "We've maintained our territory, honored our alliances, and grown stronger under Nathaniel's leadership." "Have you?" Katerina's attention fixed on Garrett with the focus of a predator selecting prey. "Then why resort to mail-order brides? Why bring humans into pack business when there are surely capable females within your own ranks?" "Because," Ingrid said from her position by the fireplace, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "a wise leader considers all options and makes choices based on what's best for the pack, not what satisfies tradition or outside opinion." Katerina's ice-blue eyes shifted to Ingrid, and something like recognition flickered there. "Ah. The famous Ingrid. Still advising kings, I see. Tell me, did you counsel this particular strategy?" "I counsel what I always counsel, strength through wisdom, not rashness." Ingrid's expression was serene, but I could sense the steel underneath. "But you didn't come here to debate pack politics with an old woman. You came to assess weakness, so assess." The bluntness of it sent a ripple through both groups. Katerina's smile widened, showing very white teeth, direct. "I appreciate that." She turned her attention back to Nathaniel. "Very well. Let me be equally direct. The Northern Territories are restless. The old alliances are shifting. Several packs are considering new arrangements. Territorial adjustments, power-sharing agreements, strategic mergers. And you want to know if Ashwood will be part of these arrangements or a target of them," Nathaniel said flatly. "Precisely." Katerina began walking slowly around the perimeter of the hall, her delegation maintaining their positions like chess pieces on a board. A strong pack with stable leadership could be a valuable ally. A weak pack struggling with succession issues becomes a liability, or an opportunity, depending on one's perspective. The threat was barely veiled now. I felt Beth tremble beside me, felt Victoria's anger spike hot and sharp, felt Claire calculating odds and outcomes with rapid-fire intensity. My own heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to stand still, to observe and process. Katerina's circuit brought her directly in front of us candidates. She studied each of us with the attention of someone examining livestock at market, and I felt my spine stiffen with indignation, even as fear coiled in my stomach. "These are your options?" she said, not quite managing to keep the skepticism from her tone. "Humans?" "Potential mates," Nathaniel corrected, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. "And I'll remind you that you're a guest in my territory, Katerina. Courtesy extends both ways." "Of course." Katerina didn't look away from us. "Tell me, which of you is winning?" The question hung in the air. None of us spoke. What could we say? The trial had barely begun, and none of us knew where we stood in Nathaniel's assessment. "It's too early to determine," Nathaniel said when the silence stretched too long. "Is it?" Katerina stopped in front of me, and I felt the full weight of her attention like ice water down my spine. "This one, the blonde with a stubborn jaw and watchful eyes. What's your name?" "Elena Morrison," I said, surprised my voice came out steady. "And what makes you think you could be queen to a werewolf pack, Elena Morrison?" The question was designed to humiliate, to expose inadequacy, to prove whatever point Katerina was trying to make. I could feel the expectation in the room, that I would stammer, deflect, or crumble under that glacial stare. Instead, I thought about Nathaniel's words. "Be exactly what you are. Don't perform." "I don't know if I can," I said honestly. "I've been here less than 24 hours. I barely understand what being part of a pack means, let alone leading one, but I do know that I'm here because I made a choice. And I know that running from difficult situations has never solved anything worth solving." Katerina's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Bold words. Do you have the strength to back them up?" "I have the strength to keep standing here answering your questions instead of running away, which is apparently more than you expected." The words escaped before I could stop them, and I felt the entire hall hold its breath. For a long moment, Katerina simply stared at me. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Oh, she has teeth," hidden under all that soft human fragility, but teeth nonetheless. She turned to Nathaniel. "This one is interesting. The others—" She waved dismissively. "They smell of fear and desperation. But this one smells of something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or defiance." "Elena has proven adaptable," Nathaniel said carefully. And I caught the warning in his tone, a message to me to be careful that I'd pushed far enough. But Katerina wasn't done. "Let's test that adaptability. A demonstration, if you will." She gestured to one of her delegation. A young man with white blonde hair and the build of a natural fighter. "Dmitri here is one of my best trackers. He can find prey in the densest forest, anticipate movement before it happens. It's a valuable skill." "What are you proposing?" Ingrid asked sharply. "A simple exercise. Each of your candidates faces a challenge. Nothing dangerous, merely illuminating. We hide something in the forest. They have 1 hour to find it. No pack assistance, no guides. Just their own resources and instincts." Katerina's smile was all predator now. "It will demonstrate their ability to function independently in your territory. Unless, of course, you believe they're not ready for even such a simple test." The trap was obvious. Refuse. And Nathaniel would appear to be protecting weak candidates, confirming Katerina's implications about pack instability. Except, and he'd be putting us at risk in ways I probably couldn't even imagine. "The forest is dangerous for humans unfamiliar with the territory," Owen said, his quiet voice carrying weight. "Especially with the boundary disputes we've been managing." "Then perhaps they're not suitable candidates after all," Katerina replied smoothly. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, and I could see him calculating, weighing options. Before he could speak, I heard my own voice again. "I'll do it." Every head in the hall turned toward me. Nathaniel's silver eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. But I held his gaze. "Elena," he started. "You said we needed to prove adaptability," I said, speaking directly to him rather than Katerina. "That we needed to show we could handle what it means to be here. So let me show you." "It's not that simple," Nathaniel said. But I could see the conflict in his expression, the desire to protect warring with the political necessity of not appearing weak. "Actually, it is." I turned to Katerina. 1 hour. I find whatever you hide, alone. "What happens if I succeed?" Katerina's smile turned genuinely amused. "If you succeed, and I doubt you will, then Frost River will acknowledge that Ashwood's succession process, however unconventional, is producing candidates of merit. We'll return north and report that your pack remains stable. And if I fail, then the question of Ashwood's stability remains open." Her meaning was clear. They'd be back, watching, waiting for weakness to exploit. The hall erupted in voices, pack members objecting, Victoria demanding to know what gave me the right to make this decision, Beth actually crying now. Through it all, I kept my eyes on Nathaniel. He looked at me for a long moment, and I felt something pass between us. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of the impossible position we were both in. Finally, he said, "If Elena agrees to this trial, she goes with the full protection of pack law. Any harm that comes to her within our boundaries will be considered an act of aggression against the Ashwood pack." The formality of the statement made it clear this was serious, binding. Katerina inclined her head. "Acceptable. We have no interest in harming human candidates, only in assessing their capabilities." "Then we have an agreement," Nathaniel said. He looked at me again. "Are you certain about this?" Was I? Every logical part of my brain screamed that this was insane. I had no experience with forests, no tracking skills, no idea what I was even looking for. But I also felt the weight of what was at stake. Not just for me, but for Nathaniel, for his pack, for the stability of this strange world I'd stumbled into. And underneath all the fear and doubt, I felt something else. A stubborn refusal to be dismissed as weak or irrelevant. Katerina had looked at us candidates like we were nothing. Like we were jokes that proved Nathaniel's desperation. Something in me rebelled against that assessment with fierce intensity. "I'm certain," I said. Nathaniel nodded slowly, then turned to Garrett. "Assemble a perimeter patrol. Nothing gets in or out of the search area without our knowledge. And find her appropriate gear. She'll freeze to death in that sweater." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of preparation. I was given a heavy coat lined with fur, gloves that actually fit, and boots designed for hiking through snow. Ingrid pulled me aside and pressed something into my hand, a small whistle on a leather cord. "If you get into genuine trouble, blow this. We'll come for you. Political consequences be damned." Her expression was fierce. "Don't be stupid brave, girl. There's a difference between courage and suicide." "I'll try to remember that," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted. Sarah appeared beside me, her young face tight with worry. "The forest feels different to humans than it does to us. Trust your instincts, even when they don't make logical sense. And if you feel like you're being watched, you probably are. The pack will be monitoring from a distance." "That's comforting," I managed. "It's supposed to be," she replied seriously. As I walked toward the hall's entrance where Katerina and her delegation waited, I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to find Nathaniel, his expression unreadable in the torchlight. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "I could have found another way, maybe, but this felt like the right choice." I paused, then added, "Besides, you said earlier that the choices we make matter. I wanted mine to matter for something." His hand tightened on my arm briefly. "When you find what we've hidden, and I believe you will, follow the stream back toward the pack center. Don't try to be clever with shortcuts. The direct path is safest. When I find it..." I raised my eyebrows. "That's more confidence than I have." "Then borrow mine," he said, and there was something in his silver eyes that made my breath catch. "I don't make mistakes about people, Elena, and I don't think I've made one about you." Before I could respond, Katerina called out, "Time to begin, little human. Dmitri has hidden your objective. You have 1 hour from the moment you enter the forest." I walked out into the December night, the cold biting through even my new layers, and stared at the dark tree line that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. Somewhere in that vast wilderness was something I needed to find. And somewhere behind me, a werewolf king was watching, believing I could do this, even when I barely believed it myself. I took a deep breath, felt the whistle's weight against my chest, and stepped into the forest. The trees swallowed me whole within minutes. The sounds of the pack center faded until all I could hear was wind in the pines, my own breathing, and the crunch of snow under my boots. The moonlight filtered through the branches in fragments, creating shadows that moved and shifted with every step. I forced myself to stop, to think. Dmitri was a tracker. He would have hidden whatever object they'd chosen in a way that tested tracking skills. But I wasn't a tracker. I was an empath, someone who sensed emotions and patterns. So what patterns was I looking for? I closed my eyes and reached out with that strange sixth sense I'd spent years learning to control and hide. At first, all I felt was the overwhelming presence of the pack. Their attention focused on me like a physical weight. Their emotions a complex tangle of hope, worry, and curiosity. But underneath that, there, something different. Not pack, not human. A trace of emotion that felt cold and amused and very deliberately placed. Katerina's delegation had left an emotional signature on whatever they'd hidden. I opened my eyes and began to walk, following that thread of foreign emotion like Ariadne following string through the labyrinth. It led me deeper into the forest, away from the pack center, toward areas where the trees grew so thick that snow barely reached the ground. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I was beginning to doubt myself when I felt it again. That cold amusement, stronger now, and underneath it, something else. Something that made my empathic senses recoil with warning. I pushed through a dense cluster of pines and stopped. In a small clearing ahead, hanging from a low branch by a silver chain, was a carved wooden box. It was beautiful in an alien way, decorated with symbols I didn't recognize, and it radiated wrongness that made my skin crawl. This was the objective, but something about it felt like a trap. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming at me to be careful. As I got closer, I understood why my senses were warning me. The box itself wasn't dangerous, but the territory around it was. I could see tracks in the snow, lots of them, circling this clearing. Not human tracks, not exactly wolf tracks either, but something in between. This was a boundary point, I realized. a place where territories met and mixed. By hiding the objective here, Katerina had forced me into a genuinely dangerous situation. I had two choices: take the box and prove I could complete the challenge, potentially triggering whatever territorial response those tracks implied, or return without it and admit failure, confirming Katerina's assessment of human weakness. I thought about Nathaniel's exhausted silver eyes, about the weight he carried alone, about the way his pack looked to him for stability they desperately needed. I thought about Ingrid's whistle, heavy against my chest, and I thought about my own stubborn refusal to be less than what I could be, even when fear urged retreat. I stepped into the clearing, reached up, and took the box from its branch. The forest around me exploded with sound. Howls, multiple voices coming from all directions. Not Nathaniel's pack, something else, responding to the intrusion into their boundary space. I ran. My lungs burned as I crashed through the underbrush, the wooden box clutched against my chest, howls echoing from what seemed like every direction. The moonlight that had guided me earlier now felt treacherous, casting shadows that moved with predatory intent. I couldn't tell if the sounds were getting closer, or if terror was simply amplifying everything, making the forest itself seem alive and hunting. I forced myself to remember Nathaniel's instructions. Follow the stream back toward the pack center. But where was the stream? Everything looked the same in the darkness. Every tree identical to the last. Every shadow potentially concealing something with teeth and claws. Then I heard it. Water. Rushing over rocks somewhere to my left. I changed direction, my boots sliding in the snow, and suddenly the ground dropped away beneath me. I tumbled down an embankment, branches tearing at my coat, the box flying from my grip. I landed hard at the bottom, the wind knocked from my lungs, pain shooting through my hip where I'd struck a rock. The box. Where was the box? I scrambled to my knees, frantically searching the snow-covered ground. Moonlight glinted off silver, there, caught in the exposed roots of a fallen tree. I crawled toward it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grasp the chain. A growl froze me in place. I looked up slowly to find a wolf standing at the top of the embankment I'd just fallen down. But this wasn't like the wolves I'd glimpsed earlier around the pack. This one was different. Smaller, leaner, with eyes that reflected red instead of amber in the moonlight. Its lips were pulled back, showing teeth designed for tearing, and every line of its body screamed aggression. A rogue, I thought, one of the boundary dwellers Sarah had mentioned. The ones who didn't belong to any pack. It took a step down the embankment toward me, and I knew with terrible certainty that I had seconds to make a decision. I could blow the whistle Ingrid had given me, bring the Ashwood pack running and prove I couldn't handle myself, or I could try something insane. I grabbed the box, pulled myself to my feet despite the pain in my hip, and met the wolf's red eyes directly. "I don't want to fight you," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm just passing through your territory." "I mean no disrespect," the wolf paused, its head tilting slightly. For a moment I thought it might actually work. That somehow, impossibly, it understood, or at least recognized, non-aggression. Then two more wolves emerged from the trees behind the first, and I knew talking wouldn't be enough. I turned and ran along the stream bank, ignoring the pain, ignoring everything except the desperate need to reach pack territory. Behind me, I heard the wolves give chase, their paws hitting the ground in a rhythm that sounded like a death sentence counting down. The stream widened, became a small river. I could see lights ahead, torches, the glow of the pack center, so close. But the wolves were closer, their breathing audible now, almost on top of me. I pulled out Ingrid's whistle and blew with everything I had. The sound cut through the night like a blade, high and piercing. The effect was immediate. The wolves behind me skidded to a halt, suddenly wary. And from the pack center ahead, I heard answering howls, dozens of them. Voices raised in response to the distress call. The trees ahead of me exploded with movement. Nathaniel's pack poured into the forest, massive wolves moving with coordinated precision, their eyes glowing amber in the darkness. At their head ran a wolf larger than all the others, black as midnight with silver eyes that I would have recognized anywhere. Nathaniel. He reached me first, placing himself between me and the boundary wolves with a snarl that made the ground seem to vibrate. The other pack members formed a protective circle, and I found myself at the center of a living wall of fur and muscle and barely contained violence. The boundary wolves retreated quickly, recognizing they were outmatched. Within seconds, they'd vanished back into the deeper forest, leaving only tracks and the memory of red eyes in the darkness. The black wolf, Nathaniel, turned to look at me, and even in wolf form, I could read the question in those silver eyes. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I managed, though I was shaking so hard the words barely came out coherent. "I got it. The box. I found it." He made a sound that might have been approval or exasperation. I couldn't tell which. Then he was moving, leading the way back toward the pack center, the others forming a protective escort around me. I walked in the middle of that moving circle of wolves, clutching the wooden box against my chest like a talisman, trying to process what had just happened. I'd run from wolves, been chased by wolves, been saved by other wolves. My life had become completely surreal in the span of a single hour. The pack center appeared through the trees, still lit with torches, the hall doors thrown open. People poured out as we approached, humans and wolves mixing together in a way that suggested they'd been seconds from mounting a full rescue operation. I saw Garrett in human form, already dressed despite the speed of his response. I saw Ingrid, her face tight with worry. I saw the other candidates clustered near the entrance, their expressions ranging from relief to shock. And I saw Katerina and her delegation, standing separate from the Ashwood pack, watching everything with calculating interest. The wolves around me began shifting, a process I tried not to watch too closely, still not ready to process the reality of people transforming from one form to another. Within moments, they were human again, pulling on clothes that had apparently been staged along the perimeter for exactly this purpose. Nathaniel appeared at my side, fully dressed in dark clothes, his hair wild and his silver eyes still carrying the intensity of his wolf form. He took in my disheveled appearance, the torn coat, the way I was favoring my left hip. "You're hurt," he said, his voice rough. "Fell down an embankment. It's just bruised." I held up the wooden box, but I got it. 1 hour, like the terms stated. Katerina stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "You actually found it. I'm impressed. Dimitri chose that location specifically because it bordered rogue territory. Most humans would have turned back. Most humans probably have better survival instincts than I do," I replied, adrenaline making me reckless. "But you set the terms. I met them." "That you did." Katerina took the box from my hands, examining it briefly before nodding to her delegation. "It seems the Ashwood Pack's succession process is producing candidates of unexpected quality. At least one of them, anyway." She turned to Nathaniel, her ice blue eyes assessing. "A human who doesn't panic in the face of rogues, who completes an objective under pressure, who has enough spine to speak back to a visiting alpha. That's not nothing, Nathaniel. If this one survives your selection process, she might actually be worth the political complications of a human queen." It wasn't quite an endorsement, but it was closer than I'd expected. Around us, I felt the pack's relief like a physical wave. The immediate threat of Katerina's assessment had been neutralized, at least for now. "The trial continues," Nathaniel said formally, "as planned. Thank you for your visit, Katerina. I trust Frost River's concerns about our stability have been adequately addressed." "For now." Katerina's smile was sharp, though I suspect I'll be hearing interesting things about your pack in the coming months. Do try to keep things stable, Nathaniel. The Northern Territories need reliable neighbors, not chaos. With that thinly veiled warning delivered, she signaled her delegation. They departed with the same synchronized efficiency they'd arrived with, disappearing into the forest like ghosts returning to their proper haunting grounds. The moment they were gone, the pack's formal posture collapsed into something more genuine. People surrounded me, voices overlapping, asking if I was all right, expressing disbelief that I'd actually succeeded, recounting what they'd heard and felt during the chase. "Enough," Ingrid's voice cut through the chaos. "The girl needs medical attention and rest, not an interrogation. Everyone back to your posts or your homes. The excitement is over for tonight." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, and I found myself being ushered back into Ingrid's workspace, Nathaniel following close behind. Ingrid examined my hip with her usual brusque efficiency, pronouncing it badly bruised, but nothing that wouldn't heal. "You," she said, pointing at Nathaniel. Need to explain to this foolish girl that heroics will get her hurt in ways that actually matter. Then she pointed at me. And you need to understand that proving yourself to visiting alphas is not worth ending up in pieces in the forest. She completed the challenge, Nathaniel said quietly. She did what needed to be done. She nearly got herself eaten, Ingrid snapped back. There's a difference between courage and stupidity. And that line gets very thin in the dark with rogues chasing you. I know, I said softly. I know it was stupid, but it worked. Ingrid muttered something in German that was probably unflattering, then stalked out, leaving Nathaniel and me alone in the herb-scented warmth of her workspace. The silence stretched between us, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. Why did you volunteer? You could have let one of the others take that risk. I thought about my answer carefully. Because you needed someone to prove that this trial wasn't just desperation. Because Katerina was looking for weakness, and I refused to give it to her. And because... I hesitated, then finished honestly. Because you've been carrying everything alone for so long. I thought maybe I could carry one small thing. Just for an hour. His silver eyes searched my face, looking for something I wasn't sure I had. You barely know me. You barely know any of us. This isn't your fight, Elena. Maybe not. I agreed. But I chose to be here. You keep saying that choices matter, so let my choice matter. He moved closer. And I felt that pull again, stronger now after everything that had happened. You're different from what I expected, he said quietly. When I saw the applications, read the letters, I thought I was looking for someone who could adapt to pack life, who could tolerate what we are. I didn't expect someone who would risk themselves for pack politics before they even understood what they were risking themselves for. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know yet, he admitted, but it's compelling. Before I could respond, the door opened and Sarah stuck her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but the other candidates are asking about sleeping arrangements. Should Elena still be housed with the general group or... She trailed off, her meaning clear. After tonight, after what had happened with Katerina, my position in the trial had fundamentally shifted. The question was whether that shift would be acknowledged officially. Nathaniel looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, Elena stays in the main house, with the primary candidates. Sarah's eyebrows rose. There's only one other person designated primary candidate right now. I'm aware. The implications crashed over me. Primary candidates meant serious consideration for the final choice. It meant I'd moved from being one of 6 options to being one of 2. Who's the other? I asked, though I thought I could guess. Victoria, Sarah confirmed. She impressed the council this afternoon with her organizational skills and her understanding of pack hierarchy. She's been handling logistics for the evening meal coordination, and apparently did it well enough that Brenna actually complimented her. That seemed like high praise, given Brenna's personality. Victoria was smart, capable, and probably better suited to being queen than I was in a dozen practical ways. But Nathaniel had still put me in the same category of consideration. Get some rest, Nathaniel said, his voice carrying the weight of command and something softer underneath. Tomorrow the real trial begins. The solstice is in 2 days. I need to make a choice before then, and I need that choice to be the right one. For me, for the pack, for everyone involved. No pressure, I said, trying for humor and mostly failing. His lips curved slightly. You ran through a forest pursued by rogues, retrieved an objective from hostile territory, and faced down a visiting alpha without flinching. I think you can handle a little pressure. The main house was exactly what it sounded like. Nathaniel's personal residence, a large structure near the pack center that combined the rustic aesthetic of everything in Pinehaven with subtle touches of unexpected elegance. I was given a room on the 2nd floor, across the hall from where Victoria had already been established. She was waiting in the hallway when Sarah showed me to my room, her dark hair perfect despite the late hour, her expression carefully neutral. Congratulations, she said. That was either very brave or very stupid tonight. I haven't decided which. Can it be both? I replied tiredly. I suppose it can. Victoria studied me with those calculating eyes. You realize what happens next, don't you? We're competing now, directly, for a position that will determine the rest of our lives and the stability of an entire supernatural community. There's no room for friendship or solidarity. I know, I said quietly. Because I did know. The trial had been theoretical before. 6 women, uncertain odds, everything still abstract. Now it was concrete. 2 of us. 1 choice. 2 days to prove ourselves worthy of something we barely understood. Good, Victoria said. Then we understand each other. May the best candidate win. She returned to her room, closing the door with decisive finality. I stood in the hallway for a moment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened crash over me like a wave. 24 hours ago, I'd been on a train, running from a past that had rejected me. Now I was standing in a werewolf king's house, one of 2 final candidates for a position I'd barely believed was real when I'd answered that cryptic advertisement. I went into my room and found it simply furnished but comfortable. A large bed with clean linens, a fireplace already burning low, windows that looked out over the forest. Someone had brought my few belongings from the shared housing, my small bag looking pathetic in the spacious room. I changed into nightclothes, washed the dirt and fear from my face, and climbed into bed. My body ached, my hip throbbed, and my mind spun with everything I'd learned and experienced. I should have been terrified. I should have been planning my escape back to the normal world. Instead, I found myself thinking about silver eyes and impossible choices, about the weight of leadership carried alone for too long, about a community that needed stability, and a king who needed someone brave enough to stand beside him. Sleep came eventually, bringing dreams of running through forests where the trees whispered secrets, and the moon watched with knowing patience. I woke to find Nathaniel sitting in the chair by my fireplace, watching me with that unsettling intensity. Morning light streamed through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "How long have you been there?" I asked, my voice rough with sleep. "Not long. I wanted to check on you before the day began." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Today you'll meet with the Pack Council. They'll ask you questions, some reasonable, some designed to test how you handle pressure. Victoria's meeting with them this afternoon. You're scheduled for this morning. What do they want to know?" "Everything. What makes you think you can be queen, how you'll handle pack politics, what you understand about our world, what you're willing to sacrifice for it." He paused. "And they'll want to know why I should choose you over Victoria, who by all practical measures is better qualified." "And what should I tell them?" I asked. Nathaniel stood, moving to the window where he looked out at the forest. "Tell them the truth. It's the only thing that works here. We can smell deception. Remember? Tell them exactly why you volunteered last night, why you ran toward danger instead of away from it, why you're still here when you could have asked to leave a dozen times. And if the truth isn't good enough," he turned back to me, and in his silver eyes I saw something that made my breath catch. "Then we'll both have learned something important." "But Elena," he moved closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. "I don't think it won't be good enough. I think you're exactly what this pack needs, even if you can't see it yet yourself." Before I could respond, before I could process what that statement meant, he was gone, leaving me alone in the morning light with impossible decisions and a future I couldn't begin to predict. The solstice was tomorrow. Nathaniel would make his choice. And somehow, impossibly, I'd become someone who actually wanted to be chosen, not for escape or security, or any of the desperate reasons that had brought me to Pinehaven, but because I'd seen a king carrying his burden alone, and thought maybe, just maybe, I could help him carry it, because I'd found something in this strange, dangerous world that I'd never found in the normal one. A place where my differences made me valuable instead of suspect. Because when I looked into those silver eyes, I saw something that felt like coming home. The trial would end tomorrow, one way or another. Everything would change. I got out of bed, dressed carefully in clothes that had been left for me. Simple but well made, practical but flattering. I braided my blonde hair with steady hands and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like someone who'd survived impossible things, someone who'd chosen courage over safety. Someone who might actually be able to stand beside a werewolf king and call it partnership instead of subordination. The Pack Council was waiting, and I was ready.